evening, public outrage continues over the recent 16% fuel tax, even as the High Court declines to issue orders to stop it. While and so Kenya continues to reel against rising taxes with a government that is borrowing heavily to meet the cost of its expenses. Is there a feasible way out of the debt choking Kenya? This is our big story tonight. And this is how the ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi describes our current situation.
That Kenyans rank among the most heavily taxed people in the world. Tragically, while governments throughout the world tax their citizens for development and service delivery, Kenya imposes so as to pay for corruption. Over the past 6 years, the national debt has more than tripled to 5.1 trillion Kenya shillings. There is, however, very little to show of what this borrowing has been put to.
Once again, that's our big story tonight, and to discuss it further, we are joined by Godfrey Osotsi, a nominated Member of Parliament and the Secretary General of the Amani National Congress, and Ken Gishinga, who is the Chief Economist at Mentoria Consulting. Our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, is dissecting this critical matter with Alihan Sachu, also an economist. Let's take a look at that conversation Sophia had with Alihan Sachu this evening.
16% VAT on all petroleum products, seeing the cost of living take an upward trajectory, causing uproar. And just late last week, we saw members of parliament belatedly make amendments to the finance bill, again seeking to postpone and push further the implementation of this tax. Now, all eyes on President Uhuru Kenyatta. Will he assent to this, or will he return the bill to parliament with a memorandum? We'll have to wait on how that will play out. But as it stands, many Kenyans worried about the requirement for them now to dig deeper to fund the huge bucket this, as a country, continues to buckle under debt. And joining me now is Alihan Sachu. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Rich Management. Thank you for making time for us. Let's begin with your thoughts on this VAT on petroleum products, because there has already been taxing on petroleum products. Correct. Now there's this 16%. We've seen members of parliament twice now push forward the implementation of the same. Now it's here with us. In your view, could have things been handled differently?
So firstly, the actual price of petroleum is about 56 shillings a litre, I think, and we're paying now, after the increase, substantially over 100, I think 120. So clearly it's going to have an effect. Oil is an input in practically the entire economy, whether it's transport, whether it's manufacturing. So we're going to see this ripple through the economy. I would have thought we're looking at between a 6 to 10% increase across the board. I mean, I would have thought it's very difficult for anyone to absorb that cost. So you're correct, this is inflationary, it increases the cost of living, it's a serious issue, and that's why we've seen so much comment about from everybody and concern. We knew it was coming. Parliament kicked the can down the road. Technically, President Kenyatta and his team played a clever game, because essentially Parliament could not kick it down the road until it had come back to Parliament. So it was a very clever technical knockout that the President deployed. I don't think the President has wriggle room to do anything else, because if you look at our debt profile, if you look at the amount of money we're borrowing, we've got to plug the gap, and this was one of the ways to plug the gap. I do think it is actually a democratic tax, because you only get taxed for what you consume. But overall, I think we're hitting the tipping point, or what is called in economics the Laffer curve, when people cannot take any more tax, and what happens is you get massive tax avoidance, you don't get tax collection in the numbers you expect. The pips are squeaking now. I think we've hit the wall.
Yeah.
And this is probably the last hurrah of tax increases. The real disease here, Sophia, is not, is actually government spending and also government wastage. And that's what's got to be dealt with. Everything else, the VAT increase, everything else is a symptom of the disease.
Yes.
And we have to deal with the disease. If you go to a doctor and he deals with the symptom and not the disease, you're not being made better.
Yes, because we see members of parliament, for instance, the leader of minority, John Badi, was saying that they knew of the plan to have this tax as part of what would raise revenue after the budget passed. So that there are those who feel there's an insincerity or dishonesty, if you like, with members of parliament who are the gatekeepers. They protect Wanjiku. Wanjiku puts them in parliament to be able to ensure it doesn't get to a place such as this. Do you, as an expert in matters economics, but also as a Kenyan, feel the same?
What, that they haven't performed their gatekeeping? Yes. I don't think they've performed their gatekeeping duties. I think they're playing politics and making it look as if they've taken the side of the person on the street. But the truth of the matter is they weren't smart enough. They didn't stop it. They made a lot of noise, but to what effect?
Right.
And I think ultimately that's the question we've got to ask them. You know, we pay them a great deal of money. They're the highest paid MPs on a per capita basis in the world. You'd expect a better performance out of them.
In terms of expenditure, the areas you feel government has to really tighten its belt. On wastage, the leakages and corruption, that's what President Kenyatta is now talking about, that it's part of his legacy to fight corruption. We've seen the various cases. We've not seen as much exuberance in as far as recovery of assets, which is what would mean, you know, money coming back that had been stolen. But how else does it curb and, you know, in terms of expenditure, make sure it cuts down? What are the areas you see it could look at?
So the first thing is to say this, you know, you can't go on doing the same thing forever. Eventually you've got to do something different. So you can't carry on taxing everybody more and spending more. We can all see the wall and it's in front of us.
Right.
And if you don't manage it proactively, someone else is going to manage it for us, right? And that is happening in a number of other countries around the world today. Zambia is a good example. I mean, that's hit the wall now. And their debt to GDP is lower than ours, but they can't borrow in the international markets. Their bond deals have gone through the roof, and you can see what happens when the domino falls. We've got to avoid that at all costs.
Right.
I like what the president's doing on his anti-corruption drive. I think it's absolutely necessary. Obviously, we'd all like to see some serious follow-through. I think, you know, the average person is looking and saying, okay, you've dealt with these people, but we know this problem, we know this problem, we know this problem.
Right.
Some of these problems are in our face. When are you going to deal with those problems that are in our face? So yes, I think he's trying to, but it's a big ask. And he's got to do it. That's as you said, it's a legacy issue. It's either you fix it or you leave it really broken.
Yeah.
And you can't afford to leave it really broken.
The wage bill.
Yes,
that's biggest problem that you have 50% of our revenue going to 2% of the population in a sense. This even admission the president himself has made. But when it comes to speaking about cutting down and reducing the positions in public service, especially with the elected members, we know they will resist to hear the high moons, if we like. So how can that be dealt with?
So you're completely correct. It becomes a political issue that you can't afford to upset people who you've got in the bureaucracy, right? I mean, that's what it always comes up against. But the bottom line is our government is too expensive, the services we are being given are too costly, and the number of people that we are keeping employed doesn't make any sense.
Right. So
he's got to cut the numbers, he's got to cut the salaries, and he's got to do it now. And the question is he going to bite that bullet? So far, in our history, we have not bitten that bullet. And that's why this problem, we keep kicking the can down the road. We'll do it in 12 months' time. We'll do it. Each time you kick it down the road, it gets worse and worse and worse. Places like Switzerland, which is one example I would give, automatically force cuts in the government. You've got this much that you've received in taxes, you can spend that much. You can't spend a Swiss franc more. If you do, you're out of a job. So there's an automatic stabilizer. We don't have that here. We need to look at how we're going to get it.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, as you can see, this is the end of the road.
Yeah, the big infrastructural projects that this government has focused on, the SGR, and we're hearing likely the president coming from China will come with another debt to fund, the SGR going forward. And the argument has been we need these loans because these infrastructural projects in the long run will spur economic growth. But is that well thought out? Because in the medium term, in the now, Kenyans are suffering.
So can I answer that? It's a twin-sided question. So first of all, the advantage of Kenya has always been that we're a transit state. We are the route to the sea for ourselves and for a number of countries around us. And that is our singular political, geopolitical, and economic advantage. And in order to secure that advantage, you've got to build 21st century infrastructure. The issue here is, are we building 21st century infrastructure? Or are we just paying 21st century prices for infrastructure which is not in the 21st century? And let me give you 2 or 3 examples. President Magufuli won the oil pipeline from Uganda. Why? Our price was considerably higher, 30-40% higher than what Magufuli quoted. Why? That is us giving up our advantages, for what? Because we were greedy. We wanted too much. We had brokerage on top. You can't compete. If you're putting brokerage on infrastructure, you can't compete. My next question is this. If you look at the railway, good idea, excellent idea. How much did we pay? Did we pay the right price or did we pay too much?
Value for money.
When will we get a return on investment? If, for example, you go and buy an asset at twice the price that you should be paying for it, your return is going to take twice as long. And what I think has happened here is exactly that. We've paid too much. Twice might be an understatement.
Right.
And then we're expecting to make returns on that to pay the debt off.
We're joking.
I don't think we're serious. And we can also see what happens to people who do this.
Who default.
Have you seen what happened in Sri Lanka? Sri Lanka, President Rajapaksa, the previous president, vanity project. Xi Jinping picked up on that and said, I don't want to do any more vanity projects. Built a port in his hometown. The port didn't even get a ship a day.
Wow.
Right? It didn't make a penny. I'm not saying we're in the same situation. What happened to that port? It got taken by the Chinese. So these are the consequences of the mistakes that if we don't deal with them now, it's going to be quite horrendous.
So Kenya might just be auctioning itself to the Chinese.
Well, if you look at this transaction with the railway, that's what it looks like. Because if we don't achieve the volume through the railway that makes it sustainable, we're paying penalties.
Let me ask you about the IMF and the power it's wielding or influence, if you like, now on Kenya in light of the standby facilities it has been offering and also the requirements it has had on our government. Are you worried?
I look at it slightly differently. I know there's a big argument that people look back at the 1990s and the IMF and the structural adjustment programs and Africa really bore the brunt of that, and it really wasn't the best thing for us. But today, let me put the question another way. Can we afford not to have the support of the IMF at a time when the market has changed? Dollars are no longer available. Currencies are collapsing all over the place. Bond yields are spiking everywhere. We can't afford it. And therefore, when I hear conversation like, forget it, we don't need it, we're okay, I want to say you're only okay in your own mind. Right? You're not okay. It is irresponsible. So I, for one, think we've got to keep the IMF on board. I think that was one of the strong things about Kenya Inc. was the relationship we had with the IMF. We have a lot of folks who've all been through the system at the IMF. We definitely can't let's be frank about who we are and look around and see other countries which are trying to play with fire and what happens.
Yeah.
Erdogan, have a look at him. Argentina, interest rates at 60%. Even 50 billion from the IMF is not sufficient for Argentina. And look around and let's be sensible, not emotional, which is what we tend to be when these things come up.
But are you worried about the state of Kenya's economy right now in light of our debt, the budget we have, and of course the various projects the country and the government is focusing on?
We don't have any room for maneuver. The credit card is maxed out. If you don't think it's maxed out, then I don't know what numbers you're looking at. I think I am worried. Of course I am. And I think everybody else is. And it's time to be worried. Let's be frank. And if anyone, our policymakers are telling you don't worry, be happy, be worried.
Be very worried.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Alikan Sachu, CEO, Rich Management, with us tonight. Be worried is the word we're hearing from those who have, of course, been observing the landscape in as far as the economics and understand the situation Kenya stands in right now. Of course, we'll have to wait to see if, when President Kenyatta returns, if he will assent to that bill. If not, what does this mean? A lot is a matter of wait and see. Back to you, Akisa.
Thank you very much. Our lead reporter there, Sophia Anuna, speaking to economist Alikan Sachu. A lot of things we can pick up from that conversation. He says we should be worried about where we are heading. In a short while, I will be engaging economist Ken Gishinga, nominated Member of Parliament Godfrey Osotsi, to just, of course, hear their views about what has been said in that particular conversation. But quickly, let's take a look at currently the Kenyan debt. Kenyans have been choked over and over again with the kind of taxes, and from The Economist, and the research has shown that Kenyans are among the most taxed citizens across the world. So let's take a look at our public debt that currently stands at 5 trillion shillings. We have stretched the limits for our public debt, and the external borrowing stands currently at 2.563. That is what we owe countries like China, where we've gone to seek debts to develop, especially infrastructure, and that has been the narrative. The domestic debt currently stands at 2.448 trillion Kenya shillings. So, of course, in total, that gets us to 5 trillion shillings in debt. And, of course, it will take Kenyans many years to pay this back. So, in 2018, where we are currently, every Kenyan has a debt of about 100,000 shillings. Let's quickly note that each Kenyan owes the World Bank 43,900. Each Kenyan, whether young Kenyan or adult. When Moi left office, each Kenyan had a debt of 19,000 shillings. And that, of course, was in just before 2002. Fast forward to 2018, each Kenyan owes or has a debt of 100,000 shillings, up from 19,000 shillings in 2002. That's about 14 years ago. Now, Kenya's debt to the GDP ratio is expected to rise to 59% in the 2018-2019 financial year, up from 56.6%. In 2013, the ratio was at 39.8%. Of course, noting that this ratio most of the time is expected to be at about 50%, but currently we've stretched it to almost 56.6%. The Kenyan citizen that pays all these taxes is currently choked, and now we are faced with another reality: tax on petroleum products, 16% VAT. And of course, this is going to not only affect transportation, the manufacturing industry, etc. My guest tonight, once again, Ken Gishinga, economist, Godfrey Osotsi, nominated Member of Parliament, and of course, Secretary General of the Amani National Congress. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here tonight. I want us to quickly start from, or pick it up from where Alikan Sachu left it. He says we're just about to get to the tipping level. We should be a worried lot. Ken, do you think this is the case? Do you agree with Alikan Sachu?
Well, good evening, Akisa. Thank you for inviting me to this debate. I think the biggest problem Kenya has is the lack of sound economic advice. I feel the kind of advice the government is receiving is a bit faulty. Why do I say that? If you listen to what the economist you just spoke to right now, he gave us a lot of misleading statements. And for me, that worries me a lot. First of all, he said Kenya does not have enough dollars. That's actually not true. Kenya has 6 months worth of import cover. The law says we should have a minimum of about 4 months of import cover. We have 6 months of import cover. So he tries to make a case for the IMF supporting Kenya. But the reality is we have enough dollars in our foreign exchange to support our balance of trade. Secondly, he talks about cutting salaries and cutting expenditure. And essentially, we call that austerity measures. Makisa, I'll tell you, if you look at any country that has practiced austerity measures, whether it's Europe or whether it's part of Asia, they've had major problems. If you look at Greece alone, Greece is just leaving, last week was finishing its IMF bailout package. Greece has become 1 in 5 people have fallen below the poverty line in Greece, and it's become a much poorer country. Yes, they are out of the problematic zone, but it's one of the things that, we do not need the IMF. I mean, Akisa, if I was to remind you of one of the budgets that Mwiraria read during the Kibaki era, and one of them was, it was without the IMF support, because this IMF support comes with conditionalities.
So then, do you think we get ourselves in the situation we are in because of the involvement of the IMF? Because we've seen a number of leaders term the IMF as bullying us into this situation. But when you critically look at it, it looks like they are forcing us, boxing us to get to a point where we will be disciplined about our borrowing and ensure that we have a way out in terms of sustainability of the amount of debt we have.
It's part of the reason, yes. What they expect us to do is to be able to balance our books, because according to them, we are carrying a heavy debt, which is true. But for me, the most fundamental question is, why is Kenya constantly carrying a major debt? It's because we don't raise sufficient revenue. And we have to ask ourselves, for the first time in this country, why doesn't Kenya raise sufficient revenue so that it does not have to borrow from international community? And it goes back to poor economic advice, because the advice the government is getting is you tax enterprise, you tax fuel, you tax labor, you tax everything that is supporting of enterprise, you end up taxing it. So you end up, and which is wrong advice. You need to look at for revenue in areas that historically and according to economic research have supported economic growth.
Okay, we're getting bad advice, especially on our economy. Let's bring in nominated Member of Parliament, Godfrey Osotsi. Thank you for joining us tonight. Alikan Sachu's sentiments, especially from our legislators, is we saw this coming. Why are we making noise now? We knew we were getting to this point, but we look like we are scrambling on last minute. You are among those who've said that Henry Rotich's move is unconstitutional. Your reaction, please.
First of all, thank you very much, Kisa, for this opportunity to participate in this discussion. I have listened very carefully to the gentleman who has just been on the screen, talking about Parliament and how we were lazy on our work. And I want to say a few things to clarify the position. One is that when the budget is read out by the minister in charge of Treasury, there are 3 pieces of legislation that are supposed to be enacted by Parliament immediately. One of which is a finance bill, which is basically talking about how the government is going to raise money through various taxes and various duties. Secondly, we have the appropriations bill, which talks about how the government is going to spend money from the consolidated fund. And we also have the division of revenue bill, which talks about the sharing of revenue between various levels of government. Now, you remember that immediately after the budget, we quickly passed the appropriations bill. And we have also been able to pass the division of revenue bill. And if you look at the time frame, the budget time frame, we were actually late, because the finance bill should actually have been passed in July. But it was only passed last week. That is towards the end of August.
Yeah.
Now, that raises concerns. And the concerns are to do with the government, the government side. Because the finance bill is a product of the government, the executive. They present the finance bill to Parliament for Parliament to deliberate and pass with or without amendments. Now, they should have brought that bill to Parliament in July or in June, so that Parliament would have discussed that bill and passed it in time. But they brought the bill for second reading and committee stage just at the tail end of August. Now, probably they may have seen the technical issue that that was going to bring, because it is very unfair that the cabinet secretary says that he was under obligation to ensure the implementation of the VAT 2016 because this other resolution of Parliament had not been assented to by the President. But let me tell you, Article 115 of the Constitution of Kenya provides that when Parliament passes a bill, the President has two options. One, to assent to the bill and it becomes law, or to return back that bill to Parliament with a memorandum on areas he thinks Parliament should look at. And that has to be done within 14 days. So even as we are speaking about should President Uhuru assent or not, we must know that if he does not assent within 14 days, then he will send it back to National Assembly for a further review. And the law says the National Assembly, when the President sends back the bill, the National Assembly can pass the bill for the second time without amendments, if they can get 2/3 of the members.
So
or they pass it with amendments. Now, the mood in the National Assembly now is that if the President brings back that bill, we will simply send it back as it was. So that has to be done within 28 days. Now, Parliament now is in recess until October next year, this year. Now, that tells you something. That's why we are saying that Parliament should be reconvened to deal with this matter.
All right. I'm coming back in a short while. A few questions to you, of course, on how Parliament in totality has handled this particular matter. This is a big story. Ken Gishinga, an economist and nominated member of Parliament, Godfrey Osotsi, is still with us here. I want us to take a quick break. Stay with us.